What is it that makes the British seaside sinister? Why does it seem to attract so many killers? Is it the fact that the tide washes away their sins? Is it the fact that it's the end of the line? There's nothing overly frightening about a big wheel or a carousel. But what is undeniable is that the British seaside attracts and has always attracted death and murder. Hello, I'm Geoffrey Wansell. I write about crime, true crime. And in this new series, I want you to join me on a journey to the cliff's edge, where land meets the sea and where life meets death. For make no mistake, there is something sinister about our British seaside towns. On the surface, they're all funfairs, candy floss and breezy promenades. But by digging a little deeper in the sand, we uncover an underworld of misfits and misfeasance, murder and mayhem. And reveal the dark lives of the most deadly coastal killers to ever stalk our shores. The murderer in today's episode could have stepped straight off the beach and out of one of our most ghastly British seaside traditions. He was a real-life Punch and Judy man, and just like the proverbial Mr. Punch, he sought to convince us that his wickedness and use of extreme violence was no more than an entertaining sideshow. His name was Terry Clifton.
Oh dear, what's all this noise? Oh, hello, Mr. Punch. Kissy, kissy, kissy. Oh, boys and girls, mums and dads, I'm very hungry today. What would you like, Mr. Punch? Oh, sausages. I do like sausages.
Perhaps one of the saddest crimes in this series took place in the town of Morecambe in Lancashire. Famous, of course, as the birthplace of the wonderful Eric Morecambe, whose real name was Bartholomew. Somehow the end of the pier had come to the end of the line. Variety had died. There was somehow very little left. One successful element in the town of Morecambe, however, was a garage run by a man called Tony Morocco, who had taken under his wing a 29-year-old called Paul Sandham. Together, they ran TM Motors. At the end of 1994, another Morecambe resident, indeed who'd been to school in the town, called Terry Clifton, went to TM Motors to see Morocco and indeed to buy a car. Now, whether or not Terry Clifton thought that Tony had somehow stiffed him, had done an Arthur Daly on him, sold him something that was a no-good piece of machinery, or whether he saw that Tony had a very large collection of rolled up 20s and 50s, we will not know for certain. But we do know that from that moment, Terry Clifton decided to rob and almost certainly to kill Tony Morocco.
Terry Clifton was a young man who began his life in south-east London. He was said to have got in with the wrong crowd, but really he was the wrong crowd other people got into. But anyway, he moved from London up to Morecambe as a boy, and he attended school in Morecambe. before going back to London, but he still had some contact with Morecambe. He was a very violent young man. At one stage he tied his father to a chair and tortured him, to give you some idea of what was part of his upbringing. Then at one stage he robbed a jeweller's store in Godalming in Surrey and used just immense amounts of violence on the two women in there. Totally unnecessary. He'd got what he went for, but nevertheless battered these women for no good reason.
Just like old Punch, beneath the colourful mask was a killer with no conscience who saw everyone he encountered as a puppet in his own show.
He was really a violent man. He was one of these men that you would not want to bump into a pub and knock his drink over, even if you apologised. He would take offence at it. He would explode. He had, let's say, an anger management problem that he couldn't control, and that's putting it lightly.
TM Motors was run by Tony Morocco, and it was a small place on the Whiteland industrial estate. The sort of cars, I suppose, £1,000 would be the sort of top range car that he'd be having, but he was doing a nice little business. He was aided there by Paul Sandham, who had been invalided out of the Royal Air Force, and he'd taken to young Paul and looked after him almost as an uncle.
On New Year's Eve 1994, 24-year-old Clifton returned to Morecambe. As well as visiting friends and family, he also dropped by Tony Morocco's garage.
He'd gone to T&M Motors with an old banger of a BMW, which he traded in for a Honda. There wasn't much money in it, but in fact he demanded £5 from Tony Morocco to pay for the petrol in the tank of the car he'd brought up from London. And that's when we believe he saw that Tony peeled off a £5 note from a wad of notes, which car dealers at that sort of level often have. And we think that's what later triggered him to go back and rob him.
Terry Clifton turns up at TM Motors, ostensibly to buy a car. In fact, his motives are much, much darker than that. He asks for a test drive in a perfectly ordinary Honda. Paul Sandham, fine, of course sir, nothing could be easier. Sandham hands Clifton the keys, and as he does so, he sacrifices his life. He wasn't to know it, but he did. Clifton wasn't buying a car, Clifton was about to kill.
So Paul Sandham went with him, and they went out to a place called Powder House Lane.
There are ways to kill people, and sometimes one stab or one gunshot wound to the head, or maybe a couple of stabs or beating is quite sufficient. Other killers go into overdrive. They cannot stop. It's fury. It's like evil. It's like the devil inside them. They just cannot stop. And they go on and on and on. So when this Clifton went to this garage and let loose, he could not stop. He was furious. He was angry like you've never seen ever.
He then drove back to the garage and just crashed in through the doors. Smashed the desks, shelves and everything, and that made his grand entrance. And then that's when he attacked Tony Morocco. stabbed him, strangled him, and eventually battered him to death with a torque gun.
In fact, on that particular day, Morocco did not have thousands of pounds in banknotes. He had a few hundred. Clifton stole that. He also stole a gold chain around Morocco's neck. And just to add insult to injury, picked the best car on the lot, a white MG Metro, and drove it away, complete with the documents saying that he could. It was an act of premeditated, unmitigating murder, and nothing could possibly forgive it.
There is the question of why use such excessive violence in the murders. I don't think it was a frenzy, because quite calmly he stole, including finding vehicle documents immediately afterwards. But it's almost as if he was reveling in the opportunity to inflict such extreme injury to the victims.
Clifton was now a double murderer, but the dramatic sideshow he had created wasn't enough. He was about to become the main attraction and the most wanted man in Britain. Terence Clifton was a 24-year-old killer with no conscience. When I look at his story, I cannot escape the parallels between how he viewed himself and Mr. Punch. Both are colourful, violent, and in their own way, the stars of their own shows.
Now don't behave yourself. I've got a headache, you naughty little son.
Terry Clifton has now stabbed Paul Sandon 40 times and dumped his body about a mile away from TM Garage, where he'd asked for a test drive. He drives the car that he's been given a quotes test drive in back to Tony Morocco's garage. He gets out of the car and attacks Tony Morocco, who's done absolutely nothing to him, and attacks him with such a vehemence, with a monkey wrench, beats him over the head in a way that you couldn't even imagine. I mean, it's almost inconceivable. It's not easy to kill a man. It's not a simple thing. It's not, oh, knock on the head, that'll be lovely, don't worry, like in a movie. This is real, brutal murder. And he murders him for no other reason than he thought that perhaps he could steal a really good car, and also he thought he might have a large roll of notes in his pocket.
Tony Morocco and Paul, they were creatures of very regular habit. They'd finish work at 5:30 and each go home. So it was a great surprise when Tony Morocco didn't come home. Then they phoned Paul Sandon's family. He hadn't come home either. They were very concerned because this wasn't what they did. It was possible, had they gone out together, had something happened to them. Anyway, eventually they called police. The police arrived, they got a spare key from one of the people that worked there and opened up the garage, and to their horror found this awful scene of carnage in there, with the cars, the battered furniture, and Tony Morocco lying in a pool of blood on the floor. And of course at that stage we had this sort of possible theory that there'd been a big falling out between these two men, and Paul had battered him to death and then disappeared, which was a reasonable theory to start with. Then during our morning briefing, another officer came in and said they've just found a body. And we thought, well, this got to be him. And sure enough, it turned out that was Paul Sandham.
Terry Clifton doesn't keep the white MG Metro for very long. He drives it to Kent and sells it. But of course, he gives a false name and address.
So now we knew that this car had gone. We put it out on HPI, the high purchase index that all car dealers use to check to make sure there's no finance outstanding on a car and that sort of thing. It was fairly early days of that then. And sure enough, the following day up came a hit from a garage in Eltham in southeast London, saying that this had been checked by a car dealer there. So we were obviously straight onto that, and we found that he had sold him another car. When we checked the registration number of that car, we found that it had been checked, had been stopped by a police officer in the City of London. But when we checked that, he couldn't remember doing this with this particular car because it was a big operation, because there had been terrorist attacks in the city. But the good thing was they had what they call a ring of steel around the city. It was the first case, I think, in the country where they had CCTV out surrounding a city. And sure enough, there was this car, and that was a very poor picture. We couldn't make out the face. We couldn't recognise the driver. But what we did notice is that his hand on the steering wheel was bandaged. Now that became very significant because at the scene, obviously the forensic scientists had taken lots of samples of blood, but there's so much of it. But having seen that, we thought he must have been injured and he may have shed some of his own blood at the scene. I told the scientists to go back and take some more samples, particularly within Tony Morocco's trouser pocket, where he would have kept his wad of money. And when they did, they found a different sample of blood. So we knew this was almost certainly the murderer's blood, because we didn't have it on the DNA database in those days. Nevertheless, it gave us another start where to look. The motor dealer down in Eltham gave us a description and did a photo fit image of this man, who he remembered he'd seen some time before as well. And he was wearing like John Lennon wire glasses and a trilby hat.
Terence Clifton was a prolific burglar and he was a prolific robber. Crime Watch showed a robbery and the CCTV showed a man committing that robbery, and a member of the public phoned in and identified the robber as Terry Clifton. The police officer investigating the case researched Terry Clifton and saw that he had connections with Morecambe. The murders had been committed, and the detective from Kent Police called the incident room in Lancashire and said, "Terence Clifton has been named in a robbery. I know that he has got contacts in Morecambe. Could there be a link?"
We got a phone call from an intelligence officer in Kent Constabulary. Now, he'd been working on a robbery in Kent, and he'd also seen on Crime Watch the photographs, the film of the robbery in Godalming, and someone had named Terence Clifton as the offender. Someone had seen this and named him as the offender. So having got him identified, that became very important. This was now a manhunt, if you like. We know who we're looking for.
Terry Clifton has killed twice. It is an extraordinary thing to do, to take two human lives. Not something that very many people are capable of. But if you think it's an extraordinary story now, it becomes even more extraordinary in the wake of the killings at the garage, the so-called garage murders. Clifton becomes a figure of some significance and indeed rather famous, because he likes the idea of being a famous fugitive.
Clifton's self-styled Punch and Judy show was by now gathering a huge audience and making headline news.
Hello, hello, hello. My name is Mr. Policeman. Come on, Mr. Punch, wake up. You're a very naughty boy.
Giving the police the slip at every turn, he was determined not to have the curtain brought down on his career as a criminal.
It doesn't take the police very long to realise that Clifton is the man they're looking for. But, and it is an extremely large but, Clifton is nothing if not clever. He starts literally a ride across the country.
Clifton was a bit of a Walter Mitty character who, when he went on the run and he knew he was a wanted man by the police in the UK, that he was playing a game with the police, a cat and mouse game. He was changing his name constantly. He was moving from address to address. He was moving from car to car. And it could be said that he was enjoying it.
Terry Clifton sees himself as a real-life action hero. You can almost see the internal story that is driving his behaviour. For him, all these events he will have seen them as a series of challenges, of hurdles that he has overcome, for him to overcome. They're essentially a series of dramatic episodes in what for him is his own, he's living out a movie script. They are dramatic episodes in his movie script.
He was playing almost like a TV fugitive, changing his car, changing his appearance, changing where he was staying. And I think there's an element of gangster, what I call plastic gangster, in the sense that he was playing at what he thought was the role of being a gangster.
When somebody does have a narrative of being able and willing to do things that other people aren't, and uninhibited by normal standards of behaviour or by the law, then that does influence the choices they make. But also, the more successful he was in putting those choices into practice, I'm sure living on the run, escaping from the police, that fueled this sense of him. Well, it's possible that in his own mind he saw himself as a kind of heroic figure.
Clifton was enjoying leading the police a merry dance, but wherever he went, he left a trail of devastation and evidence.
It was difficult. We didn't have the sort of the computer systems in those days to make it so easy, so we were always a step behind. We found his friends, and he'd always just left. We did find one who he'd swapped a Belcher chain necklace for some drugs. So we had that, quickly identified that, well, it looks like Tony's. We took it to it, because it had been repaired, so we took it to the jeweller who had done the repair, and he could say, yes, that's definitely my work, and that's the one that Tony Morocco brought in.
They don't know where Clifton is. They have no idea where he is. He is in the wind. Nevertheless, they know that he might well return to his birthplace, Erith, in South London. In an effort to track him down, they watch one of his girlfriend's flats in Erith. 4 detectives turn up at the flat in Erith, partly, of course, to interview the girlfriend. What they don't expect is that they're about to encounter Clifton himself.
We were always seemed to be a step behind until 4 of my officers went to a block of flats in Erith, and up on the 7th floor, knocked on the door to go in, and inside was Terence Clifton with a sawn-off shotgun.
The police officers are now looking down the barrel of a sawn-off shotgun. What is Clifton going to do? Is he going to kill them? Is he going to kill his girlfriend? Or is he going to turn the shotgun on himself? Double murderer Terry Clifton has nowhere else to run. Or does he? The ever-resourceful Terry Clifton was not going to allow himself to be cornered. So this double murderer turns himself into an escape artist. He backs out into the balcony of the 7th floor flat.
Now, he didn't fire and he didn't try to hold off. He went out, and because a few people gathered, then he jumped off the balcony. Now, you'd think, oh dear, that's it. But it wasn't. What he did, as he went down, he just grabbed the rail, steadied himself there, and then dropped again to the next floor, and did that all the way to the ground. The press then dubbed him Spider-Man as he made this escape.
Individuals who are described as psychopathic very often have a stance where they see themselves as against the world and the world as against them. And they can use that to justify all sorts of callous behaviour. And it's almost as if they see life as a matter of survival, where really it's dog eat dog, and you look after number one without any regard for others. There often is a sort of sense of self as being a kind of lone wolf, really outside the rules, and, well, outside considerations that apply to other people.
I think that the reason why he didn't shoot the policeman is that's recognised as the worst thing you could do, in the sense that if you shoot and kill a policeman, you know that all the police all over the country are going to make extra effort to get you. So I think there was an element of control there. He realised that if he shot the police, he'd be in trouble. Plus, he had control by the fact that he had a shotgun. That gave him the control. He was facing unarmed police officers. Brave as they are, they're not going to go and tackle him if they know that he's capable of killing. And they knew that he was likely to be the double murderer. They weren't going to risk their lives.
Terry Clifton seems to think not only that he is physically invincible, but also that he is somehow immune from detection. It's almost as if not just that Terry Clifton sees himself as a hero, but as some kind of superhero in his own movie that he is acting out. These distorted hero narratives emerge over time as somebody with an egocentric focus, an overinflated ego, imposes that ego on life and doesn't get beaten back. And we see that happening in this offence as the offence unfolds. It's almost as if every hurdle, every challenge that he overcomes just builds his ego further, so that he then will do something even more extravagant.
It was obvious at the start that the man we were looking for, Terry Clifton, was not only good at escape, but he was also very good at covering up his tracks. And this he was able to do, I think, for a long, long time. Even when he was tracked down, as was widely publicised, he clambered down the side of a building, watched by a crowd, and then escaped. And the most amazing thing, you kept thinking, well, we've almost got him, yet he managed to do that. He always seemed to be one step ahead of those officers who were looking for him. So he was, in a way, a clever man. Certainly at absconding, and certainly at staying one step ahead of the law that was seeking him.
We went round and round. Eventually one car was seen, and the armed police went in, dragged him out of the car on the floor. No, it wasn't him. He just bought that car off Clifton, but Clifton, he knew, had got another one. And as we were plotted up on one of the houses, two of my officers said, he's just come out the house, he's in the car. Great. Went in, and that was it. He was arrested
After weeks on the run, as you might by now have expected, Clifton's eventual arrest was a showstopper. It took a riot squad, supported by armed officers, finally to pin down the murderous fugitive. With Clifton now in police custody, you might have expected his ghastly show of violence and defiance towards the law would be over.
Oh, hello everybody!
Even when Terry Clifton is eventually caught and taken into custody, the drama does not end. At one point before his trial, he is taken to an interview room in Lancaster Magistrates Court to consult his solicitor, an entirely innocent 42-year-old man who had very little connection with him.
He asked for a private consultation with his solicitor, which of course is allowed. They went into the consultation room and he produced a sharpened car aerial. Which he then pulled out and held it to his solicitor's throat and took him hostage.
Clifton proceeds to hold his solicitor hostage in the interview room for 21 hours. Imagine what the solicitor must have felt. Imagine how he would have been terrified for his life. After all, Clifton had already killed twice.
Please, get in here! Come on, get in here! Everything's talk. He's calmed down. Talk? Oh, yeah? What are you planning to sort it out?
When I arrived there, the solicitor would have known full well what Clifton had done. The sheer callousness and total lack of inhibition with regard to inflicting injury that he'd shown so far. The main threat was that he would push this broken off car aerial through the ear to the brain, which, you know, would have been a very quick way of killing somebody.
I'm gonna kill him.
Solicitors there basically to help you as a criminal to build up your case or even try and prove that there's no link between you and the murders. You don't take that guy hostage. He's the man that's going to save your neck. And it seems again this idea of him being out of control and wanting to control situations when there was no need for it. He should have been working with the solicitor to build up his case.
He does seem to have been somebody who likes having control, who likes calling the shots, doesn't accept things on other people's terms readily at all. Also, I was told that he was claiming to be the angel Gabriel, which would tie in with asking for the imam to come along.
There was a lot of hostage negotiation took place. We got our experts in to talk to him, and then he threw all sorts of things in. He said, I'm a Muslim, I want to speak to an imam.
You didn't say nothing to this. I'm talking to him. You paid to get out of here. Listen, just put the...
So we got an imam to go along who very, very quickly dismissed him as being a Muslim. So that was the end of that one.
The drama built up inside there, and it went on and on and on till eventually, I think, the senior officers realised that there was life. It was life-threatening.
I asked the people who'd been in attendance for longer and the people who had arranged a possible intervention plan if they could talk me through what they had in mind. And it seemed that things had been well planned, well prepared. The only remaining problem was how to get Clifton away from the hostage. Because otherwise, any move where he felt threatened could be that the hostage was injured or even killed very quickly. So we did agree a rather, I suppose, crude move, which was just to offer a cup of coffee. That did have the desired effect. It separated him from the hostage, and Several people covered in Kevlar body armour jumped on him, and that was it. It was all over in seconds.
Eventually, when the police did the Lancashire Constabulary, the officers raided and arrested him and brought him out and released his solicitor. That became front page news as well, and we held a news conference on the forecourt, or on actually the car park at Lancaster Police Station. And it was quite remarkable, actually, because the Assistant Chief Constable and we were doing the interviews, and we realised that behind the media was a car in which the solicitor was being helped, obviously in not in pain, but obviously somewhat troubled after his ordeal, and he was being helped into his car. And the last thing I wanted to do, or I wanted to provoke, was for the interviewers who were interviewing the chief officer were to turn around and find there was drama being played out behind them, and they didn't do. And it was, but nevertheless, the interview with the assistant chief constable was an extremely good one, and they were well pleased. I was well pleased that events had passed off without too many problems.
When Terry Clifton is finally brought to trial at Preston Crown Court, the drama continues. He sacks his legal team and says he's going to defend himself, but he does not even do that. He refuses to come up from the cells. The whole trial is conducted without the defendant in the dock.
Quite a lot of criminals I've dealt with enjoy almost the theatre of the court. They enjoy the centre of attention. They know they're in trouble, they know they're going to go down in a lot of cases, but they enjoy it. It's their moment of glory, and it's also their chance to see what's going on. Now, it's interesting with Clifton, he didn't want to be in court. He didn't want that attention. And yet here's a man who's desperate to control his life and things like that. But he didn't go into that court. Was it because he couldn't face the families? Was it because he knew he'd done wrong? Or maybe he was just couldn't care less. Unfortunately, I suspect he couldn't care less.
That was the most strange trial I've ever been to, because he'd sacked his barristers, he was going to defend himself, and then he decided he wasn't going to go into court for his trial, he wasn't going to attend his own trial, which is a bit tricky because you've got to make sure everyone gets a fair hearing. So the judge appointed a Queen's Counsel who happened to be there to act as an amicus curiae, a friend of the court, to make sure he explained to him exactly what might be, what would happen if he didn't attend court, and it may not be to his benefit. Nevertheless, having had it all explained to him, the QC returned to court and told the judge, no, he won't appear. So the trial went on without him, and without him being represented.
Hardly surprisingly, the jury find Terry Clifton guilty, and he's ordered to come up into court to hear his sentence. Clifton refuses point blank.
And in the end, it took 9 prison officers. They had to wrap him round in a sheet to stop him biting them and kicking and punching. And they carried him horizontally into the court, where he was held there while a sentence was passed upon him.
The whole thing doesn't seem to have been anything like as impressive as maybe he liked to think it was. In that actually somebody being carried in by upwards of half a dozen prison officers in a horizontal position, there's almost an element of absurdity about it. It's not really a heroic stance. In fact, it might equally be seen as rather childish.
Yeah!
The judge has no sympathy for this melodrama. He sentences this callous killer to spend the rest of his life behind bars.
The questions with all murderers, such as Terence Clifton, is whether they should ever be allowed back into society.
One of the problems we're faced with somebody like Clifton is prediction of his dangerousness. He acted very impulsively and was angry and resulted in the death of 2 innocent people. No planning, very impulsive. We know that he's acted impulsively in the past. What we would have to say is he likely to act impulsively in the future? First thing I'd want to know is what kind of treatment he's had in the prison system, whether he's engaged in treatment, whether he's taken responsibility for his behaviour. If he hasn't taken responsibility for his behaviour, doesn't understand why he committed the offence, then he's still going to pose a lot of danger. We need to know why he committed the offence.
At the time of the trial, a reporter said to me, how long do you think you'll serve? And I must admit, I did say at the time, I don't know, but I hope his parole officer hasn't been born yet. But of course now here we are, all these years later, where that could be the case. But I do hope the parole board will take a dim view of him applying for release.
In the end, as they all do, Terence Clifton fell victim to his own myth and has been revealed as not an anti-hero, but a coward.
He's somebody who it wouldn't be difficult to characterise as having psychopathic tendencies. Certainly his behaviour is very callous. You only need to consider the offences and the excessive violence, but then the robbery after the violence seems to have a bit of a sense of grandiosity, sacking his lawyers and well, the whole stance that he took in court. It's also quite deceitful. I think lying was mentioned when he was talking to the imam, and certainly very reckless and impulsive. For example, when he jumped, well, scaled down the side of the block of flats. But really, a psychopath is a description rather than an explanation.
I got the impression he was Walter Mitty character. He wanted to be a criminal, and he tried to play the role of criminal without having the necessary skills to be it. I would probably describe him as a psychopath in the true sense of the word, somebody with very little sense of moral values, very impulsive, probably quite intelligent, very self-centred, and doesn't care.
Whilst Eric Morecambe is Morecambe's most famous son, there can be no doubt that Terence Clifton is its most infamous one. The tears that this brute saw others shed were not the tears of a clown, but ones of pain. Pain inflicted by a man who saw no value in human life, and in fact revelled at the fact he had destroyed it.
Join me, Geoffrey Wansell, next time for more Murders by the Sea.